Hey! Ultimately, we have reached to the second last chapter of our Class 12 insert. Let's quickly start Chapter 15. Biodiversity and Conservation. If an alien from a distant galaxy were to visit our planet Earth, the first thing that would amaze and baffle him would most probably be the enormous diversity of life that he would encounter. Even for humans, the rich variety of living organisms with which they share this planet never ceases to astonish and fascinate us. The common man would find it hard to believe that there are more than 20,000 species of ants, 3,000,000 species of beetles, 28,000 species of fishes, and nearly 20,000 species of orchids. Ecologists and evolutionary biologists have been trying to understand the significance of such diversity by asking important questions. Why are there so many species? Did such great diversity exist throughout Earth's history? How did this diversification come about? How and why is this diversity important to the biosphere? Would it function any differently if the diversity was much less? How do humans benefit from the diversity of life? Next topic. 15.1 Biodiversity. In our biosphere, immense diversity, or heterogeneity, exists not only at the species level but at all levels of biological organization, ranging from macromolecules within cells to biomes. Biodiversity is the term popularized by the sociobiologist Edward Wilson to describe the combined diversity at all the levels of biological organization. The most important of them are I. Genetic diversity. A single species might show high diversity at the genetic level over its distributional range. The genetic variation shown by the medicinal plant Rauwolfia vomitoria growing in different Himalayan ranges might be in terms of the potency and concentration of the active chemical, reserpine, that the plant produces. India has more than 50,000 genetically different strains of rice, and 1,000 varieties of mango. 2. Species diversity. The diversity at the species level. For example, the Western Ghats have a greater amphibian species diversity than the Eastern Ghats. 3. Ecological diversity. At the ecosystem level, India, for instance, with its deserts, rainforests, mangroves, coral reefs, wetlands, estuaries, and alpine meadows, has a greater ecosystem diversity than a Scandinavian country like Norway. It has taken millions of years of evolution to accumulate this rich diversity in nature, but we could lose all that wealth in less than 2 centuries if the present rates of species losses continue. Biodiversity and its conservation are now vital environmental issues of international concern as more and more people around the world begin to realize the critical importance of biodiversity for our survival and well-being on this planet. Next topic. 15.1.1 How many species are there on Earth and how many in India? Since there are published records of all the species discovered and named, we know how many species in all have been recorded so far, but it is not easy to answer the question of how many species there are on Earth. According to the International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, IUCN, 2004, the total number of plant and animal species described so far is slightly more than 1.5 million, but we have no clear idea of how many species are yet to be discovered and described. Estimates vary widely and many of them are only educated guesses. For many taxonomic groups, species inventories are more complete in temperate than in tropical countries. Considering that an overwhelmingly large proportion of the species waiting to be discovered are in the tropics, biologists make a statistical comparison of the temperate tropical species richness of an exhaustively studied group of insects and extrapolate this ratio to other groups of animals and plants to come up with a gross estimate of the total number of species on Earth. Some extreme estimates range from 20 to 50 million. But a more conservative and scientifically sound estimate made by Robert May places the global species diversity at about 7 million. Let us look at some interesting aspects about Earth's biodiversity based on the currently available species inventories. More than 70% of all the species recorded are animals, while plants, including algae, fungi, bryophytes, gymnosperms and angiosperms, comprise no more than 22% of the total. Among animals, insects are the most species-rich taxonomic group, making up more than 70% of the total. That means, out of every 10 animals on this planet, 7 are insects. Again, how do we explain this enormous diversification of insects? The number of fungi species in the world is more than the combined total of the species of fishes, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. In Figure 15.1, biodiversity is depicted showing species number of major taxa. It should be noted that these estimates do not give any figures for prokaryotes. Biologists are not sure about how many prokaryotic species there might be. The problem is that conventional taxonomic methods are not suitable for identifying microbial species, and many species are simply not culturable under laboratory conditions. If we accept biochemical or molecular criteria for delineating species for this group, then their diversity alone might run into millions. Although India has only 2.4% of the world's land area, its share of the global species diversity is an impressive 8.1%. That is what makes our country one of the 12 mega-diversity countries of the world. Nearly 45,000 species of plants and twice as many of animals have been recorded from India. How many living species are actually there waiting to be discovered and named? If we accept May's global estimates, only 22% of the total species have been recorded so far. Applying this proportion to India's diversity figures, we estimate that there are probably more than 1,000,000 plant species and more than 3,000,000 animal species yet to be discovered and described. Would we ever be able to complete the inventory of the biological wealth of our country? Consider the immense trained manpower, taxonomists, and the time required to complete the job. The situation appears more hopeless when we realize that a large fraction of these species faces the threat of becoming extinct even before we discover them. Nature's biological library is burning even before we catalog the titles of all the books stocked there. Next topic. 15.1.2 Patterns of Biodiversity. I. Latitudinal gradients. The diversity of plants and animals is not uniform throughout the world but shows a rather uneven distribution. For many group of animals or plants, there are interesting patterns in diversity, the most well-known being the latitudinal gradient in diversity. In general, species diversity decreases as we move away from the equator towards the poles. With very few exceptions, tropics, latitudinal range of 23.5 degrees north to 23.5 degrees south, harbor more species than temperate or polar areas. Colombia, located near the equator, has nearly 1,400 species of birds, while New York at 41 degrees north has 105 species and Greenland at 71 degrees north only 56 species. India, with much of its land area in the tropical latitudes, has more than 1,200 species of birds. A forest in a tropical region like Ecuador has up to 10 times as many species of vascular plants as a forest of equal area in a temperate region like the Midwest of the USA. The largely tropical Amazonian rainforest in South America has the greatest biodiversity on Earth. It is home to more than 40,000 species of plants, 3,000 of fishes, 1,300 of birds, 427 of mammals, 427 of amphibians, 378 of reptiles and of more than 125,000 invertebrates. Scientists estimate that in these rainforests there might be at least 2 million insect species waiting to be discovered and named. What is so special about tropics that might account for their greater biological diversity? Ecologists and evolutionary biologists have proposed various hypotheses. Some important ones are: A. speciation is generally a function of time. Unlike temperate regions subjected to frequent glaciations in the past, tropical latitudes have remained relatively undisturbed for millions of years and thus had a long evolutionary time for species diversification. B. Tropical environments, unlike temperate ones, are less seasonal, relatively more constant and predictable. Such constant environments promote niche specialization and lead to a greater species diversity and, c. There is more solar energy available in the tropics, which contributes to higher productivity. This in turn might contribute indirectly to greater diversity. 2. Species. Area relationships. During his pioneering and extensive explorations in the wilderness of South American jungles, the great German naturalist and geographer Alexander von Humboldt observed that within a region species richness increased with increasing explored area, but only up to a limit. In fact, the relation between species richness and area for a wide variety of taxa, angiosperm plants, birds, bats, freshwater fishes, turns out to be a rectangular hyperbola, figure 15.2. On a logarithmic scale, the relationship is a straight line described by the equation log s is equals to log c plus z log a, where s is species richness, a is area, z is slope of the line, regression coefficient, c is y-intercept. Ecologists have discovered that the value of z lies in the range of 0.1 to 0.2, regardless of the taxonomic group or the region, whether it is the plants in Britain, birds in California or mollusks in New York State. The slopes of the regression line are amazingly similar. But, if you analyze the species-area relationships among very large areas like the entire continents, you will find that the slope of the line to be much steeper, z values in the range of 0.6 to 1.2. For example, for frugivorous, fruit-eating, birds and mammals in the tropical forests of different continents, the slope is found to be 1.15. What do steeper slopes mean in this context? Next topic. 15.1.3 The importance of species diversity to the ecosystem. Does the number of species in a community really matter to the functioning of the ecosystem? This is a question for which ecologists have not been able to give a definitive answer. For many decades, ecologists believed that communities with more species, generally, tend to be more stable than those with less species. What exactly is stability for a biological community? A stable community should not show too much variation in productivity from year to year. It must be either resistant or resilient to occasional disturbances, natural or man-made, and it must also be resistant to invasions by alien species. We don't know how these attributes are linked to species richness in a community, but David Tillman's long-term ecosystem experiments using outdoor plots provide some tentative answers. Tillman found that plots with more species showed less year-to-year variation in total biomass. He also showed that in his experiments, increased diversity contributed to higher productivity. Although, we may not understand completely how species richness contributes to the well-being of an ecosystem, we know enough to realize that rich biodiversity is not only essential for ecosystem health but imperative for the very survival of the human race on this planet. At a time when we are losing species at an alarming pace, one might ask, does it really matter to us if a few species become extinct? Would Western Ghats ecosystems be less functional if one of its tree frog species is lost forever? How is our quality of life affected if, say, instead of 20,000 we have only 15,000 species of ants on Earth? There are no direct answers to such naive questions, but we can develop a proper perspective through an analogy, the rivet-popper hypothesis, used by Stanford ecologist Paul Ehrlich. In an airplane ecosystem, all parts are joined together using thousands of rivets, species. If every passenger traveling in it starts popping a rivet to take home, causing a species to become extinct, it may not affect flight safety, proper functioning of the ecosystem, initially, but as more and more rivets are removed, the plane becomes dangerously weak over a period of time. Furthermore, which rivet is removed may also be critical. Loss of rivets on the wings, key species that drive major ecosystem functions, is obviously a more serious threat to flight safety than loss of a few rivets on the seats or windows inside the plane. Next topic. 15.1.4 Loss of biodiversity. While it is doubtful if any new species are being added, through speciation, into the Earth's treasury of species, there is no doubt about their continuing losses. The biological wealth of our planet has been declining rapidly, and the accusing finger is clearly pointing to human activities. The colonization of tropical Pacific islands by humans is said to have led to the extinction of more than 2,000 species of native birds. By nature. You can get some idea by finding out how much your neighborhood hospital spends on a cylinder of oxygen. Pollination, without which plants cannot give us fruits or seeds, is another service ecosystems provide through pollinators layer, bees, bumblebees, birds, and bats. What will be the costs of accomplishing pollination without help from natural pollinators? There are other intangible benefits that we derive from nature, the aesthetic pleasures of walking through thick woods, watching spring flowers in full bloom, or waking up to a bulbul's song in the morning. Can we put a price tag on such things? The ethical argument for conserving biodiversity relates to what we owe to millions of plant, animal, and microbe species with whom we share this planet. Philosophically or spiritually, we need to realize that every species has an intrinsic value, even if it may not be of current or any economic value to us. We have a moral duty to care for their well-being and pass on our biological legacy in good order to future generations. Next topic. 15.2.2 How do we conserve biodiversity? When we conserve and protect the whole ecosystem, its biodiversity at all levels is protected. We save the entire forest to save the tiger. This approach is called in situ, on-site, conservation. However, when there are situations where an animal or plant is endangered or threatened, organisms facing a very high risk of extinction in the wild in the near future, and needs urgent measures to save it from extinction, ex situ, off-site, conservation is the desirable approach. In situ conservation. Faced with the conflict between development and conservation, many nations find it unrealistic and economically not feasible to conserve all their biological wealth. Invariably, the number of species waiting to be saved from extinction far exceeds the conservation resources available. On a global basis, this problem has been addressed by eminent conservationists. They identify for maximum protection certain biodiversity hotspots, regions with very high levels of species richness and high degree of endemism, that is, species confined to that region and not found anywhere else. Initially 25 biodiversity hotspots were identified, but subsequently 9 more have been added to the list, bringing the total number of biodiversity hotspots in the world to 34. These hotspots are also regions of accelerated habitat loss. 3 of these hotspots, Western Ghats and Sri Lanka, Indo-Burma, and Himalaya, cover our country's exceptionally high biodiversity regions. Although all the biodiversity hotspots put together cover less than 2% of the Earth's land area, the number of species they collectively harbor is extremely high, and strict protection of these hotspots could reduce the ongoing mass extinctions by almost 30%. In India, ecologically unique and biodiversity-rich regions are legally protected as biosphere reserves, national parks, and sanctuaries. India now has 14 biosphere reserves, 90 national parks, and 448 wildlife sanctuaries. India has also a history of religious and cultural traditions that emphasize protection of nature. In many cultures, tracts of forest were set aside, and all the trees and wildlife within were venerated and given total protection. Such sacred groves are found in Khasi and Jainsha Hills in Meghalaya, Aravalli Hills of Rajasthan, Western Ghat regions of Karnataka and Maharashtra, and the Sarguja, Chanda and Bhatar areas of Madhya Pradesh. In Meghalaya, the sacred groves are the last refuges for a large number of rare and threatened plants. Now, the last topic of the chapter. Ex situ conservation. In this approach, threatened animals and plants are taken out from their natural habitat and placed in special setting where they can be protected and given special care. Zoological parks, botanical gardens, and wildlife safari parks serve this purpose. There are many animals that have become extinct in the wild but continue to be maintained in zoological parks. In recent years, ex situ conservation has advanced beyond keeping threatened species in enclosures. Now gametes of threatened species can be preserved in viable and fertile condition for long periods using cryopreservation techniques, eggs can be fertilized in vitro, and plants can be propagated using tissue culture methods. Seeds of different genetic strains of commercially important plants can be kept for long periods in seed banks. Biodiversity knows no political boundaries, and its conservation is therefore a collective responsibility of all nations. The historic Convention on Biological Diversity, the Earth Summit, held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, called upon all nations to take appropriate measures for conservation of biodiversity and sustainable utilization of its benefits. In a follow-up, the World Summit on Sustainable Development held in 2002 in Johannesburg, South Africa, 190 countries pledged their commitment to achieve by 2010 a significant reduction in the current rate of biodiversity loss at global, regional, and local levels. Hope you learned important pronunciations while going through the chapter. Please do not forget to share with your friends as well. Stay connected to my channel to hear the audio of Chapter 16. Do subscribe to online biology tutorials.